In September of 2013, 27-year-old biology teacher Flynn Rogers entered the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest and never returned. 4 years later, two backpackers came across a clearing where a huge pseudo-juniper tree stood dead, entwined with a strange living mass. A gray backpack was lying in its roots, as if pulled inward. This discovery was called one of the most mysterious in the history of Skamania County. On no other September morning had Gifford-Pinchot Woods been as quiet as it was on September 13, 2013. It was then that 27-year-old biology teacher Flynn Rogers from Olympia set out on his 3-day Wolf Ridge Trail. The time is recorded from the words of a tourist who was camping near Lake Tapsho that morning. About 7 o'clock in the morning, cool air, thick fog over the water. Flynn walked by him, nodded in a friendly manner, exchanged a few words about the change in weather, and said he should be back by Monday. This reconstruction is the only evidence of the young man's last conversation. His entire route was well planned. According to Melanie West, his girlfriend, Flynn told her the night before, on September 12th, that he was going to hike not only the main part of Wolf Ridge, but also to a side section where he had once seen rare lichens. Such trips were commonplace for him. His classmates recalled that he knew mycology better than a school textbook and loved to look for strange species of mushrooms in shaded beams. Flynn's yellow sedan was found in the same spot where the parking lot camera had captured him, at the entrance to the trail, a few yards from the edge of the pine forest. The car was standing upright, without damage, the windows were not broken, and there were no keys in the lock. Inside, there was a neatly folded map of the route, a bottle of water, and an empty paper energy bar wrapper. According to the ranger who first examined the car, there was nothing to indicate a rush or attempt to escape. This is recorded in the Forest Service report. The search engine kicked in quickly. Melanie called the sheriff's office on the evening of September 16th at about 9 o'clock, when Flynn should have been in touch twice already. They registered the message and passed it on to the ranger on duty. The next morning, they began combing the area around Lake Tapsho. The area was divided into sectors using standard protocols. Dogs were launched from the point where the car was parked. Volunteers moved in a chain trying to catch any scent. A helicopter surveyed the mountain ranges from east to west. The trail was lost literally a few hundred yards from the trail, one of the dog handlers later explained. His words were included in the protocol. The dogs picked up a similar scent several times in different places, but none of the directions led to any sign of a human stop or fall. For an experienced hiker, this behavior is atypical. Usually, at least part of the route can be traced. All natural shelters were checked at once: ravines, small grottos, and swampy depressions. According to the head of the Northwest Search Group, over the first 2 days, they inspected more than a dozen miles of trails and several branches used only by local mushroom pickers. But they found nothing, not a single piece of equipment, not a single piece of fabric, not a single clue. The air teams worked in parallel. The data from the helicopter's onboard cameras was later analyzed frame by frame, but none of the areas where bright clothing elements or individual movements could be seen yielded any results. The area between Wolf Ridge and Lake Tapsho is densely overgrown with old pseudo-junipers, sagging junipers, and areas of muddy terrain where even experienced rescuers can move only a few yards per hour. The report states, "The landscape is difficult. In calm weather, there was silence in the forest, in which even loud signals were lost. It is in such conditions that it is easy to miss a person lying under a layer of pine needles or falling into a narrow crevice." The human factor was also tested. County detectives mapped out Flynn's usual route and checked his last bank transactions. There was no activity after September 12th, no credit cards were used, and his cell phone was silent. In the nearest towns, there were no witnesses who had seen a similar man after entering the trail. Flynn's neighbors recalled that he had no conflicts, was not depressed, and was not going on any risky expeditions. Colleagues at the Lyceum said that he was preparing for the new semester, checking laboratory equipment, making appointments with students for electives. Everything indicated a normal, predictable routine. Official reports stated that the search lasted over a week. The forest was searched from morning to dusk. It did not rain those days, so the absence of footprints could not be attributed to anything. The hard ground and thick layer of pine needles easily hide old prints. The report of the group of climbers who were also involved states that most of the open areas were clearly visible from the slopes above Wolf Ridge, but they did not see any sign of a hiker or abandoned equipment. By the end of the week, the sheriff's office had a picture that was described in one sentence. He went out and disappeared. That's how they still remember him today. Without any struggle, without animal tracks, without a sharp deterioration in the weather that could have pushed a person into a ravine or made them get fatally lost. The disappearance of Flynn Rogers has been recorded in the Skamania County Archives as one of those cases where the forest seemed to close in on a person, leaving nothing that could be called a landmark. On August 19, 2017, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, two backpackers, 26-year-old Ashley Gordon and 25-year-old Lena Petrova, were moving through a remote area of the forest southeast of Lake Tapsho. This area is not included in the official tourist routes. There are no marked trails, the terrain is difficult, and the vegetation is so dense that even in August, the ground underfoot remains wet. According to the girls themselves, they chose this particular part of the forest because they wanted to shoot natural footage of the wild zone, where you can't hear the voices of tourists and can't see the footprints of visitors. The interrogation materials later state that about an hour before the discovery, Ashley and Lena stopped to rest near an old fallen trunk. There, they noticed that the smell in the air had changed. Lena described it as sweet like rotten tar. Ashley said it was more like a warm, musty, moldy scent. Both descriptions are included in the report because the smell was the first signal that they were approaching something unnatural. As they moved on, the ferns around them grew so tall that they blocked their view. According to Ashley, she noticed a gleam of light deep in the thicket, but at first thought it was wet tree bark. They parted the foliage and emerged into a small clearing almost perfectly round, shaped as if someone had carefully selected all the vegetation within a few yards. In the center stood a pseudotsuga, a tree of enormous age with a massive trunk that would normally be covered with rough bark. But there was no bark. The entire trunk, from the base to the first large branches, was covered with a thick gelatinous mass of purple-gray color. The protocol describes this as an unknown substance that visually resembles a biological plaque but does not resemble any known fungus or lichen. Ashley, who was the first to get closer, said that the mass seemed to be moving, although not fast, more like heavy breathing under a layer of mucus. The surface shimmered, creating the effect of an oily film. The traces of these optical flashes are captured in the video the girls made with their phones. Lena admitted that she wanted to get closer and touch it, but Ashley abruptly stopped her. According to Lena, Ashley said it might be toxic or infected. I saw that she was nervous, so I backed away too. Their emotional reactions are important because they indicate that even without scientific knowledge, they instinctively sensed danger. The mass had a distinct sweet putrid odor that increased the closer you got to the tree. Reports indicate that the smell resembled a mixture of fermentation and rotten pine needles. At the very roots of the pseudotsuga, a gray tourist backpack was lying partially covered in the substance. It was this backpack that instantly turned an accidental discovery into a potential crime scene. Ashley noticed a strap that was poking out from under a layer of gelatinous mass. The color of the fabric was severely discolored, and this was recorded in the report as signs of prolonged contact with a liquid or organic environment. According to Lena, at first they thought they had come across the abandoned equipment of some reckless hiker. It was only when Ashley tried to touch the backpack with a stick and saw the mass shift slightly, as if reacting, that the girls finally realized that it was not a natural object. The sheriff's office has an accurate record. Quote 2 shocked. This is described in the report of the specialist who watched the video. Then the events unfolded quickly. The girls moved to a safe distance and began filming the clearing on their phones, commenting on its condition. What is recorded on the video shows panic. Ashley says a phrase that was transcribed in the protocol as follows: "It looks alive." Lena responds, "Stay away, don't touch it." Their testimony states that they did not start descending immediately. They first tried to find cell service. Only a few minutes later, when the signal appeared, Ashley called 911. The call was recorded at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The operator described her voice as scared but clear. Meanwhile, Lena was standing with her back to the clearing so that no one would come from behind the tree, as she explained during the interrogation. This behavior is very typical of people who feel threatened, even if they do not understand its nature. While they were waiting for the dispatcher to respond, Ashley took several close-up photos. Later, experts would note that 2 of the pictures showed pale turquoise flashes inside the mass, as if they were short pulses of light. They cannot be attributed to the glare of the sun. At that moment, the lawn was semi-shaded, as confirmed by the metadata from the cameras. There is an important detail in Lena's testimony. She noticed that the ground under the tree was drier than the surrounding thickets. In her opinion, something sucked the moisture out of the ground here. This observation was later confirmed by the rangers. The soil surface around the roots was abnormally hard for the August forest. After a few minutes, the girls retreated from the clearing a few dozen yards, but continued to hear a faint crackling sound, which they described as the crunch of old pine needles, but as if under the weight of something soft. This is also included in the report, although without categorical conclusions. All these details, recorded separately from the words of both witnesses, later coincided almost verbatim. It was this precision and repeatability that led to the discovery being recognized as potentially dangerous not only for people, but also for the forest ecosystem. At the time, Ashley and Lena did not know that the backpack they saw halfway up the tree matched the description of a model belonging to a hiker who had gone missing 4 years earlier. Their task was to stand back and wait for rescuers. They did not touch the tree, did not go closer, and did not try to pull out the find, which, as investigators emphasized, could have saved their lives. All the facts that they had conveyed during the initial interrogation in the forest are preserved in the reports without edits. An unknown smell, unnatural silence around the clearing, the movement of the substance, and the presence of a backpack that looked like it was being pulled inside. These indications immediately raised the priority level of the operation because the situation clearly went beyond the usual cases of finding the equipment of missing travelers. It was this clearing with a dead pseudo-tsuga and a jelly-like mass that became the first new element in a case that had been considered hopelessly frozen in the archive for 4 years. The video, which Ashley Gordon and Lena Petrova sent to the dispatcher immediately after the call, was reviewed at night. The service report states, "The image is fuzzy, but you can see a backpack partially submerged in an organic mass of unknown nature. There is variable light activity in the thickness of the substance." This wording was the reason for raising the risk level to potential biological threat. On the morning of August 19, 2017, it was decided to send a full-fledged interagency group to the site. It was headed by Detective Sarah White. The case file mentions that she knew the story of Flynn Rogers' disappearance well. In the early days of the search operation, she worked as a patrol officer and was one of those who checked the trail branches near Lake Tapshoe. Her joining the case 4 years after the unsuccessful investigation was, in her words, a vicious circle that brought me right back to the beginning. She gave this comment to journalists much later, but it was included in the archival materials as context. The group arrived at the starting point of the route at 7 o'clock in the morning. It consisted of 3 rangers, 2 forensic scientists, 1 biological threat specialist, and specialists from the private company Ethelred Bioconsulting. The latter came at the urgent request of the State Department of Health after seeing footage from the backpacker video. The report from the Division of Epidemiology states that the substance may belong to a class of unknown mucosal colonies or expansive fungal structures. This wording did not contain any conclusions yet, only an assumption based on superficial features. According to Sarah White, it took them over an hour to reach the clearing. The girls got the coordinates right, but they had to move very slowly due to the density of the thickets. In the report, the detective mentions that they could smell the smell long before they arrived. It was sweetish, heavy, similar to what Ashley and Lena had described. One of the rangers compared it to stale honey and wet earth. This comparison is recorded in the column Subjective Characteristics of the Environment. Upon seeing the tree, the first thing the special teams did was to retreat. The report of the command group reads verbatim: "The substance covered the tree in a continuous layer and looked unstable in structure. Gases or toxins may be released." The scientists' protective suits were immediately put on alert. The rangers set up a temporary barrier of caution tape and defined a safe zone of approximately 40 yards around the tree. This decision was made based on the fact that the substance could react to heat or the approach of people. Experts from Ethelred Bioconsulting approached slowly, taking measurements with dosimeters, heat sensors, and portable air analyzers. The radiation background indicators were normal. In the air, they said, there was an increased content of organic volatile compounds of unknown origin. The concentration was not dangerous, but unusual enough to proceed to work exclusively in full gear with filtration. The substance itself visually looked the same as in the video, a dense layer of purple-gray hue, with periodic internal light pulsations. One of the biologists noted in his report that, quote, "Through feeling unwell. My head is buzzing, weakness throughout my body." Quote, 4. "I can't go on. The weakness is growing. Camping by a strange tree. It's covered in the same fungus." Quote, 5. "It's growing, slowly. It's on my backpack, on my hand. It reacts to heat. I can't get up. It's not a fungus. It's something else." All of these lines coincide with the information the girls passed on about the appearance of the substance on the tree. The very fact that Flynn recorded the body's response to heat in his notebook became a central element for further analysis. The report states, "An indication of heat sensitivity may indicate an organism's capacity for basic motor skills or directed growth." The research conducted in the laboratory on the same day confirmed that the structure of the substance had zonal heating, which could not be explained by simple decay. Forensic experts emphasized that Flynn's notes cannot be considered a full-fledged medical or scientific characterization of the events. These are subjective records of a person who was in poor health, showed signs of disorientation, and was face-to-face with an unknown phenomenon. However, the consistency of his words, the dating, and the coincidence of details with what was found in the clearing made these notes extremely valuable. The contents of the notebook became the first documentary evidence that Flynn Rogers did not simply stray from the trail or get lost. He was confronted with an organism that, at the time, had no analogs in any catalog of biological agents known to state or federal authorities. The notebook itself, after the analysis was completed, was packed in a sealed container and transferred to the archive along with the experts' findings. It became both the last message from the missing tourist and the starting point of a new stage of the investigation, which changed the idea of what exactly they encountered deep in the forest. The Ethelred Bioconsulting Laboratory received the first samples of the substance late in the evening of the same day they were removed from the tree. The material arrived in sealed biocontainers, sealed in 3 layers of film, as required by regulations for unknown biological agents. The official report states, "The samples demonstrate thermal activity that does not decrease even after prolonged transportation." This particular point was initially considered a device error, but subsequent studies confirmed it. The first analyses were conducted in a high degree of security. The biologists expected to see a structure similar to a slime or a fungal colony, but the results quickly destroyed all standard assumptions. The cells of the substance had signs of both animal and plant structure at the same time, with membranes resembling plasmodial membranes and internal inclusions characteristic of photosynthetic organisms. This duality led scientists to label the organism as an unknown polymorphic cluster. The very next morning, it was assigned a code name, Obscurus gelatus. The laboratory protocols contain a key description of the first contact with the sample in a heated environment. Biologist Miriam Crust noted, "When the instrument, which was several degrees above room temperature, was brought closer to the material, the texture changed. The substance slowly pulled toward the heat source. This movement was slow but unambiguous. It was repeated several more times at intervals, and the result remained the same. All observations were documented by video recordings from the cameras in the laboratory boxes." The second important result concerned the organism's ability to interact with wood. The scientists took bark fragments from the same tree and placed them in a sterile container along with a microscopic amount of the substance. Within a few hours, a gradual retraction of the fibers was observed. The morphology department's report states that Obscurus gelatus cells secrete enzymes that can decompose organic structures and absorb them as nutrients. The properties of these enzymes did not match any known fungal or bacterial analogs. The most disturbing part of the experiments was the section on temperature sensitivity. The data confirmed what Flynn Rogers had described in his notebook. The body does not just move in the direction of heat, it changes the intensity of its activity depending on the temperature. According to Dr. Brown, the head of the research, when the temperature increased by several degrees, internal impulses in the thickness of the substance became more frequent. This was recorded by thermal imagers installed at different angles. The experts concluded that Obscurus gelatus was not a standard representative of the local flora or fauna. The final conclusion states, "This is a colony of unicellular organisms with complex behavior that may be a primary form of collective locomotion." This wording means that the organism acts as a whole, not as a collection of individual cells. A separate point of analysis concerned the question of how this organism could interact with humans. The laboratory relied on Flynn's notebook entries and mass changes on the tree. Studies have shown that when in contact with warm surfaces, the substance rapidly increases its activity, grows, and is able to envelop objects. Several tests with heated fabric samples proved that in the presence of a heat source, it accelerates the absorption process several times. That's where the reconstruction of the possible scenario came in. No expert could say for sure, but several signs coincided with the text in the notebook. According to Sarah White, who was present at the meeting, the key argument was a phrase repeated in several protocols. The substance shows pronounced thermotropism. That is, it moves where it is warmer. In view of this, it was hypothesized that Flynn, when collecting the sample, accidentally brought a part of the organism into his camp. A backpack, clothes, fabrics. Any of these items could have become a carrier. In his notebook, he describes weakness, headaches, and disorientation. The doctor who analyzed his notes noted that such symptoms could be both the result of infection and the result of delayed oxygen starvation if the body partially limited movement or breathing. One of the most important reconstructions was included in the official report. Attracted by the warmth of the human body, the organism could slowly grow on skin, clothing, or equipment, causing paralysis and restricted movement. All the scientific evidence supported this. The substance was capable of enveloping warm objects with the same slow inevitability observed on the tree. After the death of the heat source, the colony apparently moved to the nearest stable surface, the tree trunk. The structure of wood allows for slow but continuous fermentation and nutrition. Subsequently, this trunk became the epicenter of Obscurus gelatus growth. All of Ethelred Bioconsulting's findings were submitted to the State Department of Health and the Sheriff's Office. In the final part of the document, there is a sentence that was highlighted as a separate paragraph. The possibility that the substance has existed in a latent state in the forest for a long time cannot be ruled out. The potential environmental threat requires immediate control measures. It was at this stage that it became clear that this was not just about the tragic fate of one tourist. The discovered organism could be part of an ecosystem that people still had no idea about, and that could be dangerously changing under the influence of external factors. The Sheriff's Office received new instructions the very next day after the lab's initial report. The documents called it a transition from a search operation to a localization operation. All previous methods developed to search for missing people in the forests were no longer applicable. Now the key was not trails, shoe prints, or even the discovery of equipment, but temperature. It was the main sign of the presence of Obscurus gelatus, which, according to biologists, retained increased heat even at the stage of minimal activity. The first thermal imaging surveys were conducted from a helicopter. The recorded temperature spots were analyzed carefully. There are many heat sources in the forest: animals, areas of decayed wood, places where moisture escapes. But already in the first report, the crew noted 3 anomalous points, one of which was located almost at the same latitude as the rescuers worked 4 years ago during the search for Flynn Rogers. The fact that the anomalies had regular rounded contours and did not change shape during helicopter flights allowed them to be classified as stable thermal structures. Then the ground teams took over the work. Rangers, biosafety specialists, and the Ethelred Bioconsulting team entered the forest. Everyone followed a single protocol: thermal imagers at maximum sensitivity, air composition monitoring, and organic particle tracking. Soil moisture was also important. Preliminary data showed that the substance prefers areas where water is retained in the Earth's thickness, but does not come to the surface. The first colony was found in a shallow ravine a few miles south of where the Sudatus was located. The ravine was shaded, with a dense layer of wet pine needles underfoot. The thermal imager showed a stable zone of elevated temperature several feet wide. During the inspection, the specialists in protective suits saw a smaller but visually the same substance, purple-gray with a sluggish pulsation of light in the depths. It was recorded that it covered a dead log that had completely lost its top layer of wood. The report emphasized, the structure of the organism is consistent with the main colony. This was the first confirmation that this was not a unique case, but a spreading one. The second colony was found in an old logging site that was used by Stellar Timber Corp. Several years ago. This site was abandoned after a conflict with environmentalists, and there were several piles of wood waste embedded in the ground. The heat spot detected from the air coincided with the place where a shed for drying the felled trunks once stood. On the ground, they found fragments of a substance that covered the remains of wood. Biologists concluded that the organism chose these areas because of the presence of semi-decomposed materials that are easy to absorb. The third colony was located much deeper in the forest, in a crevice between 2 slopes, where moisture was constantly accumulating. It was the smallest find, just a few scraps of substance on rocks and pine roots. But its heat signature was clear. The report indicated that this colony could be younger, or in the initial phase of growth. It was monitored without any attempts at contact, as the experts assumed that even small fragments could germinate with enough nutrient material. In parallel, satellite images from previous years were studied. Several areas were identified that had previously shown signs of vegetation stress, such as discoloration, the death of individual trees, and the appearance of round gaps in the crown. At first, these features were attributed to storms or insect pests, but after the discovery of 3 colonies, the assumptions changed. The team of analysts drew up a map of the potential spread of Obscurus gelatus. They identified risk areas, including areas near an abandoned quarry where chemical releases into the soil had been recorded over the years. These emissions could have changed the acidity or temperature of the soil, creating favorable conditions for the organism to awaken. An important hypothesis emerged in the documents of the health department. The organism could have existed in the forest in a latent form for an unknown period of time, not being active until an external factor caused a sharp phase change. Possible factors included an increase in temperature due to summer fires, changes in soil chemistry, and disturbance of natural layers of the earth due to industrial activities. Separately, the reports mentioned that all 3 new colonies were located in areas where human activity had already altered the natural balance in the past. This reinforced the assumption that Obscurus gelatus reacts to ecosystem destruction by using disturbed areas as a kind of entrance for active growth. Temperature monitoring continued uninterrupted. All groups working in the forest were instructed not to come into direct contact with suspicious areas. There are several indications in the protocols that the substance reacted to human movement even at a distance. Thermal imagers recorded short flashes of internal colony activity when the group approached the perimeter. Because of this, the survey area was expanded even further to avoid accidental stimulation of growth. The overall picture that the scientists and investigators gathered was disturbing. The organism was not random, it was not local, and it was not dead. It had existed in the forest for a long time, probably in a hidden form. What had triggered its activation remained a matter of debate, but all experts agreed on one thing. This phenomenon could no longer go unnoticed by scientists or state authorities. The Biosafety Task Force met in the morning at a temporary base set up at the edge of the forest. The documents state that several agencies, the State Health Department, the Forest Service, and the private laboratory Ethel Red Bioconsulting, were required to decide on the methods of eradication. The main problem was that Obscurus gelatus was both dangerous and highly persistent. Any careless exposure could either spread it even further or cause a reaction that no one could have predicted. The burning method was the first to be rejected. Environmental reports clearly indicated that even a controlled fire could have kicked particles of the substance into the air, where they would have mixed with soot and could have traveled many miles. The second option was rejected. Groundwater in the area feeds several streams that flow into large rivers, and the risk of poisoning would be too high. That is why Ethelred presented a quarantine protocol, which is described in the case file as a slow, isolated destruction procedure. It was based on special polymer cocoons. The material of these cocoons had several properties: complete tightness, resistance to organic enzymes, and the ability to block thermal radiation. The last point was crucial because it was heat that stimulated the activity of the colony. The installation of the first cocoon, the one that covered the tree with the largest mass, took several hours. They worked exclusively in heavy protective suits with autonomous breathing. Rangers set up a perimeter, and only 4 specialists were allowed inside. The reports on the actions at the site indicate that when the workers approached, the substance on the tree showed wave-like pulsations. They were recorded by thermal imaging cameras. That is why the installation was carried out as slowly as possible, without sudden movements. After the first colony was covered with a cocoon, it was isolated from the environment. The temperature inside the shell began to drop. This is confirmed by the data from the sensors that were fixed under the outer layer. When the difference between the internal heat and the ambient temperature decreased, the activity of the substance decreased. Subsequently, not a single light pulsation was recorded. Only then was it allowed to use highly specialized reagents. According to official information, the Ethelred Company prepared them on the principle of combined action, a combination of antifungal substances with targeted destruction of cell membranes. The formulas of these substances were not made public, but the documents indicate that the reagents acted only inside the cocoon and did not pose a threat to the environment. The treatment lasted for many hours. The expert's report states that the substance did not react to the chemicals immediately. After the injection of the reagent, the internal structures of the organism showed chaotic impulses, which later disappeared. These impulses were initially interpreted as attempts by the colony to restore heat, but their intensity quickly faded. 2 other colonies were eliminated using the same protocol. They were much smaller, so the process of isolation and treatment took less time. There is an important detail in the reports. One of the colonies, the one in the ravine, showed signs of spreading to nearby roots in the early stages. This caused concern because despite the general inertness of the substance, the presence of new branches meant that it was capable of autonomous reproduction. However, all the branches fell under the cocoon, and experts assured that further spread was stopped. As for the search for Flynn Rogers' remains, they continued in parallel with the elimination procedure. Rangers combed the outskirts of the clearing, including areas where secondary colonies had previously been found. They used metal detectors, sniffer dogs, and organic residue analyzers. No hint of human bones or tissue was found. The final report of the investigative team stated that in the event of probable contact with the colony, the human body could have been completely decomposed in a period of much less than a few years. This was explained by the fact that the substance's enzymes actively destroyed not only wood, but also protein structures. Experts emphasize that in the 4 years since Flynn's disappearance, any traces of the body could have been completely assimilated. Small fragments of clothing could have survived, but due to the movement of the colony and its further growth, the chances of finding them were almost zero. That is why the backpack and the items found on the tree were officially identified as the only material evidence of his fate. After the eradication was completed, all the places where the colonies were located were taken under long-term monitoring. Temperature, humidity, and motion sensors were installed. All these systems had to work continuously and transmit data in real time. The forest around the clearing was transferred to the status of a closed zone, and all open sources stated that the reason was environmental stabilization. From that moment on, the search operation finally turned into a process of surveillance and prevention. And although scientists believed that the cleanup was successful, the recorded characteristics of Obscurus gelatus forced the authorities to declare the site hazardous for an indefinite period of time. The official closure of the Flynn Rogers case went unnoticed by the public. Internal documents from the sheriff's office state that the decision was made after receiving a full report from the laboratory, fieldwork results, and a risk assessment for the population of Skamania County. The wording of the cause of death is presented as cautiously as possible. Severe complications after exposure to an unknown biological agent. The authorities did not give any more precise definitions because even experts could not classify the detected organism with absolute certainty. When Melanie Rogers received the official notification, she was also given copies of the notebook entries and a summary of the expert's conclusion. According to the sheriff's office employee who handed over the documents, Melanie remained silent for a long time, just holding the folder in her hands, and then uttered a phrase that was recorded. "At least now I know he didn't disappear into the darkness without a trace." Those words reflected what officials called a cautious appeasement. She didn't get a body, she didn't get a grave, but she knew what happened to Flynn. It was the only vestige of clarity among the mysteries the story left behind. Melanie received permission to install a small memorial sign on the side of the road near Lake Tapsho within a few weeks. The sign is modest, a wooden plaque mounted on a stone with her name and the date of her disappearance engraved on it. According to the ranger who accompanied her during the installation, she spent more than an hour sitting next to it, sitting on a trunk that had fallen years ago. In his official report, he noted, "She was not crying. She just looked toward the path." The clearing where the tree was found was officially included in the Register of Closed Natural Areas. The decision was made after biologists concluded that even after the colonies were eliminated, residual activity at the level of microstructures could persist indefinitely. The area was fenced off and warning signs were installed. The area was designated as an environmental stabilization zone on maps for tourists. Only service groups were allowed to stay there, and then no more than once every few months. Rangers who worked in the area noted that the forest had changed since then. A report on a seasonal walkthrough contained the phrase, "The atmosphere near the old route has become unnaturally quiet." According to one of the inspectors, even birds avoid the lowland where the pseudo-tsuga was standing. The description is subjective, but it is repeated in several protocols. The scientists explained it as a change in the microclimate after working with the cocoons, but the rangers believed it was something else, that thick silence that seemed to hang between the trees. The researchers who worked with the case file were also not calm. The final document of the Department of Health states, "The possibility of the existence of other undetected biological structures in the depths of the forest cannot be ruled out." This wording was left in this form on purpose to avoid both assertions and objections. At the same time, they added a recommendation for periodic monitoring of adjacent areas, especially those with old soil disturbances. Discussions about the source of the Obscurus gelatus continued for a long time. Some scientists believed that the organism was an indigenous life form that simply never manifested itself until serious disturbances occurred in the ecosystem. Others suggested that the colony could have appeared due to soil contamination with chemicals. There is even a hypothesis in the materials about a mutation of a rare slime mold caused by abnormal conditions. Neither version has been confirmed definitively. The Gifford Pinchot forest gradually returned to its usual appearance, at least outwardly. The trees were regenerating, the ferns were rising again as a continuous green carpet, and the paths were overgrown slowly and naturally. Nature never leaves empty spaces, but everyone involved in the investigation knew that the return of the outer appearance did not mean the return of inner peace. In their official reports, the rangers wrote that they now move through these areas differently, slower, more carefully, as if sensing the presence of something that should not be disturbed. At meetings, they recognized that the forest was lurking. This word, lurking, appeared in several documents independently of each other. Flynn Rogers' death became a symbolic marker of the boundary between the known and the unknown. His story was included in the internal instructions for rangers to remind them that phenomena may exist in natural areas that human classification systems are not yet able to cover. One of these documents states, "Man is not always the rule maker. The forest may have its own defense mechanisms." The silence that had returned to Gifford Pinchot was different than it had been 4 years ago, when Flynn had last set foot on the Wolf Ridge Trail. She was no longer just natural. It was wary, deafening, and filled with the sense that under the layers of pine needles, under the roots of old trees, and between rock outcroppings, there might be many more life forms that people had not seen or understood. Flynn's story was a warning, not a heroic or romantic one, but a harsh documentary one that reminds us that nature is not always weak. Sometimes it acts quietly, slowly, and ruthlessly, so that no one realizes its true power until it is too late.